Welcome everyone. This is the first Drastic Measures live stream. Today we are celebrating the 11th birthday of the Jinn Tonic Show. It's a show I've been archiving on this channel. Technically, we are one day late on these celebrations as I had to postpone the original plan to broadcast yesterday. That's because I've not been very well. However, I'm joined by a very special guest. He's the original host of the Jinn Tonic Show from all those years ago. He's been known since that time as Lawmaster Noja, but back then he was known as the Almighty Atheismo. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm the Craig Kilborn of the Jinn Tonic Show. I hosted it before anybody gave a damn about it.
Yeah, well, it's a real pleasure to have you here. I think I'm just going to dive right in. As I say, it's been 11 years since the show started. I think a lot of people are surprised it's still going, but I was. Yeah. Well, I remember when we first spoke. Yeah, you were fairly shocked yourself. So, yeah, I suppose my first question, and I suppose a lot of people would be interested from those who remember you back in the day. How did it all get started, and how did you get involved in it?
Well, of course, this is not too long after 2001, and people were always, arguing about Islam this and Islam that. It was always on people's minds. And Aaron Ra, who I'm sure people already heard of, his personality on Skeptic YouTube, had a confrontation with an apologist called Hamza Tzortzis. And so he challenged him, basically. He said, Hamza said something to the effect of, "Oh, you guys won't debate me." Oh, that's right. He wanted to talk to that other the other guy who we actually ended up having as a guest. Boy, I'm drawing a blank on everything these days. What is that guy? I'm sure you're familiar with. Guy with the glasses. That narrows it down, doesn't it? PZ Myers.
Wow. Yes, yeah, PZ Myers. Yeah.
I've been away from anything Skeptic YouTube related. It feels like another lifetime. It really does.
Okay, yeah, because I remember you were previously on the Magic Sandwich show, weren't you? I seem to remember.
I made a few appearances, and I see you smile in the chat. Thank you. I'm very flattered. Anyway, so he really wanted Tzortzis really wanted to debate with PZ Myers, and Myers said that he wasn't interested, and he said, if I go, you'll apologists have a way of just bringing their fan base in to win by force of numbers and heckling from the crowd. And, a lot has happened. And now, there's been so many civil wars. There's been so many civil wars in Skeptic YouTube. I don't know how people feel about PZ, but you have to admit he was completely vindicated on that point. If you saw Lawrence Krauss, Professor Lawrence Krauss debate Tzortzis, where Tzortzis brought in, over 100 people, it seems, just to hoot and holler like it was an episode of a daytime television show where, they're like, "You are the father," Maury Povich style. Yeah, he definitely was exonerated in that. But anyway, so Aaron says to Hamza, he says, "Well, if you want to come on and debate some skeptics, if you think that's something you want to do, we have a show." And he told him about the Magic Sandwich Show. And at that point, well, not long after that, another user, a friend of mine now, even though we haven't spoken in a long time, called the Rationalizer, contacted me. Okay, so Aaron and DPR Jones, and a few other people involved in the show, sat down at their headquarters and talked briefly about how they wanted to go about it. And they said, well, we could use someone who has a little bit more of a specialization in the language. And I've studied different languages my whole life, and I'm a big fan of books of antiquity. So not to sound too arrogant about it, but I was exactly the person that you would want in your corner at the time. And the Rationalizer, who is very involved in specifically rebutting apologist arguments, he introduced himself and he said, "I want to test you." It was like he was like it was like some Arthurian legend where he's like some knight appears in my path. He says, "I want to test your knowledge on it, sir." And then I answered a few things, and it was to his satisfaction. He said, "Yes, he's the chosen one. He's the one you want to have when you debated Hamza." And it was really, when we went on the show, it was Aaron's challenge, so I stood back for the most part and let them engage, but I just gave sort of supporting fire whenever Hamza tried to make a linguistic specific argument that was obviously just a smokescreen, which is something that apologists for religion in general, but I think Islam, when they debate Westerners, they'll do in particular. For example, debating Christians, they'll often make a sort of Hail Mary defense where they say, well, that's not what the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic says, and they have no idea. They have no idea. It's purely a bluff on their part. But and you can just say it point blank. You say, I think you're full of it, but in the case of Westerners and sort of never Muslims, people with no background, when a Muslim apologist says, "Oh well, the original Arabic, the original classical Arabic says this and that word can mean this," and it's a much more intimidating, and you have far less of a frame of reference. So that's why they use that tactic and use it so effectively. And in one of the opening salvos of that debate, or in that show, he did exactly that. He says, "Oh, that word can mean anything," and I just sat there and did some bluffing of my own, because I read out the passage that he was quoting, and then I was like, okay, well, here, let's break it down word by word by the concordance. And you just saw all the blood drain out of his face when he realized that wouldn't work anymore. It was one of those anime reversal moments where I just teleported behind him, and I had to, the original English to Arabic concordance and all that. And so he didn't try that again for the rest of the debate, and he got massacred, in my humble opinion. But I mean, the funny thing about that is if that video is still up, you can look at the comments that people were leaving, like layers of sediment, and see sort of the history of how people's attitudes changed and evolved about that. Because it wasn't as though it was a challenge to a one-on-one debate, but at first, because like I said, this is a time when passions were really high. People in the chat were really angry at any apologist. They were nearly every comment at first was them just slagging off Hamza and cheering for us when we landed a headshot. But then over time, you'd see more and more the comments shifting towards people saying, well, it wasn't really fair to him because you were outnumbered, you outnumbered him, and so forth. And it got to the point where I started to waver and say, well, maybe I should have butted out. Maybe I should have stayed out of it altogether. But then, a couple of things happened. First of all, like I said, there was that debate with Lawrence Krauss where I saw that Hamza had no problem bringing in outright hecklers and, lining the audience with people like that. So, fuck him. He clearly has no concept of like an honorable confrontation. And in the second place, I woke up to the fact it's like, these people are softballing what he said. They're completely ignoring what he's saying, but complaining that we were somehow unfair to him, or that the format was unfair to him. But we got him to go on record saying that he felt that in his society that he would build according to his notion of Islamic law, people would get their heads cut off for thought crimes. And he says, well, it's painless. And I thought, well, if anyone can, hear him say that and think that we're the problem, then that speaks volumes about their mentality.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to confirm for the audience, I mean, the debate or the conversation you're referring to was an episode of the Magic Sandwich Show, and
That's
I think
correct,
it was done a few months before you started the Jinn Tonic Show. I have actually reproduced, because it did exist. It does exist, but it's in a dozen different pieces. So I've actually stitched it together and
Oh,
reproduced it
right.
as one long video, which is on this channel. I think it's one of the first things I posted as kind of a like a prologue to the Gin and Tonic Show, because for
Yeah.
me it felt very much like um the first chapter, which kind of
Yeah.
it led in some respect, because it was a few months later than the you and Klingshaw and Rationalizer and
Stop
Hassan Radwan.
spamming. Oh, wait, I don't know if Stop Spamming joined us right away, but he became one of the regulars.
He was very soon. I think it was within 2 or 3 episodes he became a regular as well. So I think the core group was you, Rationalizer, Klingshaw, and Stop Spamming for the majority of the original run of shows.
At first, we must have had, and it's been a long time, so pardon me if I don't remember the exact timeline of events. We must have had either Ali or Hassan, because when
Hassan.
Klingshaw and Rationalizer really cooked up the idea of the show. But for whatever reason, whatever spirit had inhabited them and was misguiding them, they wanted me to host. And they said, well, we saw you on the Magic Sandwich Show acting like an asshole and cracking lame jokes. So we thought, you could come and do that here too. So they just put me in charge for some reason.
I think it was a good decision. I think it worked out very well.
I guess it's a matter of people always hating their early work, because I heard through the grapevine at one point that Klingshaw had deleted a lot of the old videos for whatever reason, maybe it's taken a different direction or that they'd been lost, and I rejoiced because I would would get up on that show. And I would have drink so much caffeine, and I would just be cracking all these lame jokes, and we would let it go on really long. And I was, after I'd stopped doing it, I was very self-conscious of the goofiness, and what the thing. There were a lot of issues and several real low points to my hosting of the show. But now, of course, I feel a little bit not really vindicated, but my concerns of that are soothed, because now, of course, live streams are so much more popular in a variety of things, and going on for 4 hours where it sometimes gets very directionless is the norm. So I guess I wasn't so much of an outlier in that regard. But one of the recurring challenges for me is that I wanted the show to be educational, but it would often get so dry that I would feel worried that the audience would fall asleep or just that would just anytime you do infotainment, getting the right balance between things that are humorous and interesting, and or you think that was just humorous and lighthearted and watchable versus what's edifying. It's a very, very difficult balance, and sometimes I'd feel like, okay, like I'm watching an imaginary monitoring machine. It's like, okay, well, this is all very informational, but I'm just gonna run out there with some making fart jokes or whatever, and sometimes I was so worried that it was getting too dry that I put in stuff that was just flat and puerile and terrible, and then like now it is what it is. It's up there, you can't take it back.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're starting to make me feel a bit guilty now, considering that I brought back the entire run and reintroduce it to YouTube. I'm not sure if I'm going to inherit your kind of ire now in me doing that.
No.
But I mean, from my perspective, I wasn't actually watching the Gin and Tonic Show during your era. I came on board and I found it. I think at the time when Stop Spamming and Klingshaw had kind of revived it, which I think was about 6 months after you had left. But when I went back to watch them, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I think a lot of people would agree. I thought it was a really good blend of information and humor, and I think you almost have to have a slight gallows humor about it, because some of the topics that you touch are so dark. You're talking about child marriage and sex slavery and killing apostates and all sorts of kind of dreadful things. So I felt that you struck a pretty good balance, and I do remember some of your kind of geeky jokes, and I don't know. I've got a soft spot for them because I thought, yeah, you were trying hard, and sometimes they didn't land, and I know exactly what that's like, and I thought you always plowed through straight afterwards. So yeah,
I'm the kind of person who I'll sometimes just I'll make a joke that I know that only I will get. Like if I made one I made a Samuel Beckett play reference that required you to know some like very specific history of Islam and also Samuel Beckett's plays, and I knew nobody would get it, and that was what was funny about it for me. That I would
yeah,
be
well, yeah, that's all right too. I mean, look, if you're going to put in the effort to do a 3 or 4 hour show, I think you've earned the right to do that occasionally.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I mean, that's the other thing is anytime you do something live, it's never going to be pure gold.
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, apart from there were certainly more technical problems going on then, and I think that was just the time. We're talking 2011, 2012, 2013, and you were on a Blogspot TV or something like that. So
Yeah, blog TV. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was there was inevitable technical issues, which I've tried to edit out as much as I can when I've put them up to sort of polish it a bit. But with the exception of that, I thought the shows ran more smoothly than most shows do today. I mean, you talk about being directionless, but for the most part, I mean, I've been chaptering it so it's easier to kind of consume. If somebody wants to come in and see on a particular topic, they don't necessarily have to watch a 4-hour video. They can just come for that particular piece of information. And I found it very easy to chapter most of the shows because I did think that they generally stayed on course. You had a few times when they went off on tangents, but on the whole,
Yeah.
I thought he stuck to the topics with a remarkable discipline. I mean, considering that you had large panels, often 4 or 5 people, you had multiple callers, Muslims, non-Muslims, ex-Muslims calling in.
Yeah.
I felt you did a damn good job considering this was that was your first time kind of hosting a show like that.
Yeah, I think it was first time hosting, first time really public speaking, and that's I think that sort of thing is a good way to if someone is worried that they can't speak in public, doing it on the internet as a surrogate is a good way because you start to take the Bob Ross attitude towards speaking. Just say what you have to say. You'll make mistakes. Don't worry about it. Don't feel bad about it. Real quick, if we could backtrack to something else. You were talking about the opening lineup of the Jinn Tonic Show. Like I said, it must have included either Ali or Hassan because when Klingshore and Rationalizer approached me initially, I said that I only would have one condition, and that we had another young man, we had another young Saudi man,
Godless Saudi.
Yeah, yes, I think so. I think but anyway, we had. I said I only had one condition, and that was that we had to have one ex-Muslim or some in the show at all times because. Like I said, because of the time frame it took, and against the backdrop that the show would be taking place on, I felt that we had to have at least one person who was a former believer, so that if we were cracking jokes at the expense of the religion, or if they were we were talking about a particularly controversial subject, I wanted to have one person on the panel who would say, "Okay, guys, time out. That's my family you're talking about."
Oh, right, I get. Yeah, so you're not kind of you're staying within the bounds of taste and not necessarily crossing that line.
And that's really a danger. That's really a danger with a lot of topics. You see that more and more today about nearly any third rail issue is the dehumanization is always a problem. The otherization. So I said, okay, I want at least one person. Not only are ex-Muslims more equipped on almost every level to discuss these things, but like I said, I wanted at least one human face to people from this background at all times. And like I said, it's been so long, and I feel I'm doing them a service by forgetting who was there. But we had.
I can help you with that. Since I've reviewed it all recently. You did have Hassan Radwan was there for some of the earlier episodes. You also had a gentleman called Godless Saudi, and then the Ali was he was more prevalent later on. He was there for a lot of the later episodes in the run. So I think between those three, you covered most episodes you had at least one ex-Muslim. I think you might have had one or two others in terms of guests as well, because I think you had a number of ex-Muslim guests on at different times. So you had Mariam Namazi, you had what was the gentleman's name? Farhan Qureshi, I think his name. He was there for a couple of episodes. So I think between all these people, you achieve what you wanted to do by having that kind of ex-Muslim presence there. So
yeah, I mean that was always far more than any kind of any other realm or any other front upon which religious skeptics battle. The tone policing was a constant when it came to debating Islam and Islam-related issues. And someone in the chat said Hassan was a good voice to have on the show. Yeah, he was, especially when he would get a little drunk and then do a recitation, which was always to the much to the amusement of the ex-Muslims in the chat. The rest of us, it sounds the same, sober or drunk, but to them, it's like some grand. It's this great comedy. It's some Ali G show stuff to have someone doing the proper recitation, but just a little off because they've had some wine. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Hassan did actually show up when because when I first started putting the old episodes up, I began by kind of live streaming some of them just in case anyone wanted to make comments if they remember the old shows. And Hassan did actually show up for one of them.
Oh, that's cool.
We were kind of startled but pleasant surprise, like, oh, I remember this. I remember talking to these guys back in the day. And so I had a little chat. I have spoken to him since, just in comments, and I've advised him obviously of the anniversary coming up, and he gave me in typical Hassan style, he gave me the most gentlemanly and polite brush off in terms of joining again for the show. So I think he's well and truly retired now, but yeah.
Well, I remember his involvement in the debate and his views was a real and I hope I'm not sharing any information that I shouldn't. It was causing a lot of issues between himself and his family, and that's something a lot of. I think it's obviously more severe in the case of in the Muslim world than it is, say, in more North America and especially Europe, where there's more of a secular tradition. And so I felt I was sympathetic to the situation that he found himself in, and when I last heard from him, he described himself as a cultural Muslim, at least, or he called himself a Muslim. Who knows where he really stands or whatever, but I understand that between your whatever he believes in his own heart, between between some goofballs that you just met on the internet and the people closest to you related by blood and by lifelong engagements, obviously your family is going to come first. So he's doing whatever he has to do. I wish him the best.
I mean, I have my personal views on his likely position, but at the same time, I don't want to kind of be talking about him as he's not. I mean, I'd love him. I have invited him to come and have a chat in a similar manner to you, which, as I say, he's politely declined. So, I can respect that. But
well, go
ahead.
But the thing is, his case, if anyone would tries to deflect the imperative or the need to debate issues of religion and things related, people disowning or coming close to disowning or having these even just a strained relationship over, from our perspective as atheists and agnostics, imaginary things is reason enough. There could have never been a single drop of blood spilled in the name of religion for the sake of argument. Obviously, there has been a great deal of it. But even if it was just, a daughter not wanting to speak to her father because the father doesn't believe in the same kinds of ghosts and goblins and ghouls and gods that they do, that's reason enough. That's reason enough for me. Anyone who says, "Oh, well, why do you bother?" And this was a very common thing. Apologists and ordinary believers of all stripes if they were feeling a little bit beleaguered or didn't have a comeback, they say, well, why do you bother? What's the difference? What does religion hurt? And so forth and so on. Even a single family member cutting another person out over things that aren't real until proven otherwise. That's reason enough. That's damage enough, in my view.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Atheismo, before you started the Gin and Tonic Show, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you had maybe a passion for books of late antiquity, and you clearly done study in terms of Christianity, if you were arguing that on the Magic Sandwich Show. Had you done a lot of study into Islam before you started the Gin and Tonic Show? And if so, what had kind of brought you to that?
I just read the Quran and read a concordance of it in Arabic. You know, language is a subject that intimidates a lot of people. If you talk about people's educational background or what they can do, there's two things they always say that they don't like. They say, "Oh, I'm no good with math," and I'm no good with languages. You know, it always seems to most people as this excessively difficult thing. And to learn another language fluently, to really get the entire vocabulary and speak it like a native, is tough. But learning new writing systems and things like that, comes easy if you just once you've learned a few patterns of syntax that are unfamiliar. Then it's like sitting down behind the controls of a vehicle similar to one that you've already driven or flown, or sitting down and playing a computer game with eerily similar controls to one. They come faster and faster. So you could give me some new language and I can become at least literate in it in a short amount of time, because they all follow basically the same patterns. So yeah, I wasn't really too steeped in it. Like I said, I just most people on both sides of the debate knew next to nothing, and that was the thing. And this was something that actually disappointed me when I entered, threw my hat into the ring of debating Islamic stuff. Is I bought into the notion that the typical Muslim believer was much more knowledgeable about their religion than the average Western Christian, right? Because, of course, first, like a lot of people who got in any way involved in skeptic YouTube, I would go about my business in the real world and was surrounded, it seemed, on all sides by people who believed in supernatural things stemming from these traditions. And when you're the only person who doubts or just doesn't believe outright, it can be very smothering. And you think, well, it's hard to deny, what my own senses and reason tell me, no matter what my community tells me. So then you find skeptic circles like skeptic YouTube online, and it just, you feel like, okay, well, I've wandered through life with my tray of food looking for the smart kids table to set my tray down, and now I finally found it. Of course, then after you've sat there a while, you realize, okay, maybe not. But yeah, the thing is, you get there and you're so excited and you jump headfirst into debating, at the time, mostly Christian apologists. You had all of the great battles that atheists make murals and friezes of Thunderfoot versus Venom Fang X and all that business. But you quickly find if you're arguing with the rank and file believers, that they don't know anything about their scripture. They don't know anything about their scripture. They know what their pastor tells them and not much more. And then atheism plus happened, like a dark event. Then the Fire Nation attack. Yeah, that was bad. That was bad. The thing about skeptics is they're like, it reminds me of the Greek city-states back when they would unite to fight off Persia, and then immediately, the moment Persia wasn't an immediate threat in the short term, they'd start fighting each other. That's kind of they unite to fight an apologist and just distinguish themselves, and then they'd get right back to squabbling. But anyway, let me finally wrap up my idea here. Is you argue with rank and file believers, and they don't know anything. They don't know anything. I talked to I was donating blood plasma one time in real life, and I brought up the issue of the Nephilim from Genesis, No one there had even heard it. They all like looked askance at me like I was making it up. And that's only like the first few chapters of Genesis. Most Christians, they don't even, they'll hold the Bible, wave it around. They don't want to read it, and that was really disappointing. If you're looking for a challenging debate, if you're looking for a way to show off what you know, so then when people shifted at least a little bit to focusing on Islam, I thought that it was like graduating onto a greater level of difficulty, because they talked such a good game about their scriptures and culturally unique aspects of their doctrine and so forth. So I thought I was graduating, that these were people who were like, they went to their schools on Friday, their mosque schools, and they were going to be really knowledgeable, and it would be a real challenge. It would be but it wasn't. They're every bit as ignorant about the contents of the Quran and the extended library, and that was really disappointing. And what I found is that while even though it was a lot of work, I enjoyed the project of reading all of these different books. The core scriptures and other books related to the history of the rise of Islam as a religious and political force. There were extremely diminished returns by learning more than you had to, because what would happen is, if you talk to a rank and file believer who was going to play like, amateur junior apologist with his little plastic badge and say, I'm going to be a junior apologist. Well, almost immediately they would cave and say, whoa, hold your horses. I'm not a scholar. That stuff's not up to me. You want to talk to somebody else. So it's like, well, I guess I read a lot of that shit for no reason, because there's no point to it.
No, it's funny you should say that, because that echoes a piece of the show, which I remember you complaining about that exact thing, where you kind of get this runaround game where an apologist will say, okay, you've read the Quran, okay, but you need to go read the hadith. So you run away, you go away and you read the hadith, and you come back and say, oh, right, have you read the Sura? And then you go away and read the Sura, and then you come back and they say, oh yeah, but have you read the this commentary or that commentary, and have you read the latest scholar? And they keep sort of sending you back, and then by the time you've read everything they suggested, they kind of admit that they haven't read it themselves, and they've just had you on this it's just been this pointless kind of runaround where they've just wasted your time.
Well, sometimes you get people who say, well, in order to actually interpret the Quran, you need to study for 20 years. And I'd say, oh, damn it, I've only studied for 19 years. Which that's not even true, but it's a little joke. Well, the thing about if we have any weebs who watch this, there's this crazy anime. It's called the Monogatari series, and it's a joke even amongst fans of that about how convoluted the watch order is. And it has like they have like a chart online of, okay, first you watch the first season of this, then you watch the first season of that, then you go back and watch the second season of that, which is basically a third season of the overall show. Then you watch the movies, then you read then and only then do you read the light novel, then you go back to the series 2 of the, and they have this elaborate diagram. And the thing is, with if you wanted to really become acquainted with all of Islamic law, unlike the way it's presented in Christianity, where they say, okay, well, the Bible's supposed to be your one-stop shop. There's certainly a lot of books written on the subject of Christianity, but the scripture is a single piece. It's it's a console that contains everything that you need. But with Islam, they're I guess much more closer to. Well, and it's just that's the funny thing is. Islam's actually more normative in this regard. If you look at other religions like Judaism or Hinduism, almost anything, the idea of having a one-stop shop for your scripture is mostly a Western thing, mostly a Western Christianity thing, because other religions tend to have your core scripture and then a lot of downloadable content. There's there's an extended library, and like I said, at first. I rose to the challenge, but of course that material varies a great deal in its quality, and that's the thing is you'll have some people people who are either critics of Islam, or some people who are more kind of fitting a stereotype of just of an anti-Muslim conspiracy theorist. I try to keep the word Islamophobia out of my vocabulary because it's just such a meaningless buzzword. But when there are people who are, anti-Muslim conspiracy theorists who just want the most like shallow, these people are bad, they're out to get you kind of, some pastors on religious channels, they'll take this very kind of reductionist attitude, obviously, and it's facepalm inducing to watch them kind of stumble through a very shallow understanding, because I don't think that they understand. They'll often think, well, the Quran's their Bible, right? So all of their stuff must come from the Quran. When you actually read it, you understand that the Quran is very much the junior partner in terms of the law, and also in terms of the juicy stuff, the controversial things.
I mean, I've got to say, I'd go a step further. I would say that the Quran, when I read it years ago, I felt it was almost useless by itself, because it's so fractured the way it's written. It's non-linear. It makes references to events that it assumes you've got outside knowledge for you to get. Now, I'm ex-Christian myself, so you've got the Christian stories that are often referred to in the Quran that you sort of got some vague memory of. But if you came there without a kind of Judeo-Christian background, you wouldn't know what the fuck half of this stuff was going on about. And it's repetitive. It just jumps randomly from topic to topic. And you really do need the hadiths and the commentaries just to get some of the basics, I think, in the Quran. So yeah, the comparison to think that you can read the Quran in isolation like you can with the Bible and just you've got Islam all figured out is delusional, I think.
Yeah. That's the thing is, well, I mean, if someone were to ask me which was the book that was my favorite, or between the Bible and the Quran, or which I would rather read again, I'd say the Quran, just because it's shorter.
Yeah.
But no other reason, because other than that, it really is lacking in any kind of merit just as a piece of literature. And I've read a lot of books, epics from ancient times and the early medieval ages. I'm using and a lot of religious and books, original scriptures, and it's very dry, but it can be rewarding when you get through. But like you said, the Quran is so lacking in format that it can seem pointless. It can be often like listening to one half of a telephone conversation, like someone's in an elevator talking on a cell phone, and you're hearing information, but you have no frame of reference. So it's really. Someone says, I laugh whenever I hear someone say they picked up the Quran and convinced this. Yeah, there's no way. There's no way that book could convince someone. Unfortunately, in the wake of 2001, the people would, well, you had some Westerners who would say, oh, look, this is what everybody's talking about. I want to be this. I'm going to grow my beard out and hold this book. And then they didn't know anything about it. They were attracted, unfortunately, to the more controversial aspects of it, which, to be fair, that's not all there is to Islam. That's not all there is to the Muslim diaspora. But what a sad turn of events it is. If you're a religious community, no matter how much you want new members, for people to see, oh well, these beheadings and bombings. Edgelord Islamism. Someone in the chat said, people just LARPing. Which, if nothing else, is incredibly disrespectful to a community to join them. It's like, because you anticipate induction into some kind of radical environment, or what you admire, or you're this is often the case. You're co-opting the victim mentality that some of the more disaffected or extreme members of that community. You're co-opting the controversy to make it your own. Because I don't know, I guess your life is too boring, or you need some explanation for why you don't get along with others. I think there are a lot of people like that, a lot of misfits, who said, well, now before people didn't like me because I was a jerk. Now people don't like me because they're Islamophobic, it's stuff like that. But there's let's see. If you really wanted to know everything that there was to know, there's such a huge library of books. But then, of course, there's the Quran itself. Then, of course, you have the Sunnah, and the Sunnah, for those who don't know, the Sunnah are they are collections of sayings. I'll start out very simple. They're collections of sayings by the founder of the religion and by his family and his top lieutenants, and they are treated as though they are religious case law. Just like, for example, in our system, we would reference a Supreme Court ruling. If we're in some circuit court and someone's trying to appeal something or make this or that argument, we say, well, in this landmark case of Smile versus Cultured Jinni, they ruled in favor of Smile because of this reason, and it was a higher court than what we're in now. That's basically what the Sunnah are. Is someone was walking along and chewing gum, and Muhammad said, "Hey, how's it going?" And the guy's like, "Oh shit, am I in trouble?" And he says, "Hey, chewing some gum?" "Yes." "Okay, cool. Have a nice day." And he said, "Okay, so chewing gum is all right." That's basically the Sunnah, and it's really it's almost humorous how they're hanging on his every word. But Muhammad was not a very organized person, so they would just hang around him and be like, "Hey, quit picking your nose." And it's like, "Did you guys hear that? Did you guys hear that? Anyone who picks their nose is gonna get it. We're gonna." And then over the centuries, people debating about, well, what should the punishment be if you pick your fucking nose? But there's no question that it's condemned. The question is, how severe should we be about it? I'm sure everybody here has seen Life of Brian, where they have a parallel parody version of Jesus. If you were to do the same thing with Muhammad, it would be infinitely funnier, although I don't think anyone would have the courage to do it, because he was a fundamentally goofier person than Jesus or Moses ever were. He was such a scatterbrained individual. He was very petty. He was very, very anxious and neurotic in many ways. If you were to make something like that, it would be hilarious. And that's the Sunnah, is people hanging on his every word. But in terms of its role in any kind of dispute between apologists and critics, the Sahih al-Bukhari in particular is like the Hunter Biden laptop of Islam, in that you wonder how could anybody have left something with so much incriminating evidence just lying around. Now, someone asked, did you ever read any of the Islamic law codexes like Shafi's Risala? I didn't read that one in particular. There were a lot of law books, and so for example, you have 6 major Sunni collections. I had a really hard time getting a hold of any Shia collections. The Shia have different collections. They're often the same exact stories, but they have a different chain of narration, a different what they call an isnad. But no, I mean, there were lots of law books. The law books, like I said, with the Sunni Sunnah, you have 6 books, and then you're not done because there's lots of others, but those are the core. And then with the law books, it's much more decentralized. Of course, you could go a step further and read Malik's Muwatta, which is another. The library just keeps going on. I mean, if you guys remember The Matrix, how they summon up those guns, they imagine that, but books, just law books over and so many books of law, so many and then specific comments on they have they have these other books called the Tafsir, which are just commentaries on the Quran itself. And then they have the Tariq, which are the official religious histories. They have all this other stuff that you basically need to know in order to have any frame of reference to know what the hell they're talking about when you read the Quran.
I mean, in that sense, I do have a certain sympathy for the average rank and file Muslim, as you were talking about earlier, who really doesn't have a clue into, they're so ignorant. I mean, it's hard not to be on some level ignorant unless you want to devote 30 years of your life going through every single one of these hadiths and commentaries, etc., over and over again, and thousands of different interpretations. I mean, I can understand why you would just think, oh, I'll just let my local imam will tell me what I need to know and I'll just be done with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, if I didn't know any better, I would think that it was made deliberately convoluted for that reason. But I don't actually think that's the case. I don't think in those kinds of conspiratorial terms, because you can read along with them and you can see that these people are legitimately searching for answers and peppering Muhammad himself with all kinds of annoying questions, and you can hear the dismissiveness. It's a bit. If anyone's seen Ricky Gervais's The Invention of Lying, that's basically the closest thing you'll get to that fictional Islamic version of Life of Brian. That's the closest you'll get to seeing that. Is at first he enjoys being able to dictate these things, but then it gets to the point where they're like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? And he's like, everybody just shut up. Leave me alone.
I was going to ask, just to bring it back to the Jinn Tonic Show when you were hosting, you did have, considering it was, as far as I know, it was the first kind of panel show that was really dealing with Islam. I mean, there's been plenty since, but it was a bit of a trendsetter. And I was surprised at how many decent guests you managed to get on the show. I was thinking one particularly, you had the historian Tom Holland come on to discuss
that was probably my worst episode. There's 2 episodes that are my eternal marks of shame. The first was the one with, and I don't know if these are in order. The first is with Tom Holland. The second was with PZ Myers.
PZ Myers was a lot earlier. That was within the first half.
I think you're absolutely right. PZ Myers, it was an embarrassing lack of preparation on my part, and he's kind of a hard guy to talk to in some ways. Normally, with guests, you have it's like a piñata. You strike them and stuff falls out. You say, okay, well, we have the guy with the greatest stamp collection on our show today. Welcome to the program. So how did you get involved in stamp collecting? And they'll just gush about it and you have to stop them. That's normally how most guests are. It's how most people are. PZ was a bit different. You'd ask him a question and he'd be like, no. And it's like, do you want to expound on that a little bit? But it was my fault for not having proper fallback questions, and it was a real shameful lack of organization and preparation on my part. And we had one person on there who was badgering him about going on. And at first I thought, well, he can defend himself, but then it got annoying. It was an awkward show, and it was 90% my fault for not being a proper host, and not having enough questions enough specific questions to keep the ball rolling on the conversation. The other one was Tom Holland, where I was inexcusably aggressive with him, and I was
about to say I was surprised how actually it wasn't just you. I think Klingshaw was also really combative with him as well. I wouldn't say you were, I think you might be being a bit harsh on yourself saying you were aggressive, but you did seem to be challenging almost every word that he said at the time.
I think that my tone was simply too angry, and I watched it back and I was shocked at one point. Rationalizer during the show, during the broadcast, he messaged me and he says, "You want to calm down? You look like you want to just punch this guy in the face." And excuse me, I need to clear my throat.
Well,
pardon me. Go ahead.
No, I just say, luckily for you, although I have put that episode up, only the first 9.5 minutes of the actual video footage actually exists. So any angry look that you had doesn't show after that because I've just
Oh,
had to
okay.
play the audio. So,
Well, yeah,
um,
like I said, my tone. I mean, we argued about it, several things, and I still stand by the arguments I made. But he did that was absolutely totally unprofessional and uncalled for. Just the tone that I took with him was just far too aggressive and combative. Um, and I watched it back and was really embarrassed by my own behavior. And I stopped and thought, you know, why was I so mad? Why was I so aggressive with him? And I think that I was bottling up frustration with other guests,
mm,
leaving guests with whom I would uh, show much more restraint, because I would be like, well, you know, this is a very sensitive issue for them. This is, you know, they're coming on to a panel where it's nothing but critics of theirs. So I realized that like a geyser pressure had been building up with me dealing with Muslim believing guests, and the kid gloves with which sometimes I would handle them. And then we had someone with whom I didn't have that kind of restraint. You know what I mean? I didn't
yeah.
feel that need, and then it all came gushing out. And then this poor guy who just was there to promote his book.
I mean, and I still found it was a very useful episode to listen to. And I mean, yeah, I'll admit, I would say that it did seem to be a bit aggressive, but I think he took it in his stride pretty well, and I
Yeah,
think it was still an interesting conversation to have. And the fact that
he
you
was.
were,
I think he was completely wrong on the points, but he was definitely the bigger person in terms of how patient how forgiving he was of our behavior, my behavior specifically. He was the bigger person, but I still think that I still stand by the specific issues that I took with what he was arguing.
no, that's fine. And to be honest, better that you were honest to say, yeah, you know, you've got a disagreement here, and I'm not just going to kind of pretend that I agree with you just because you're and certainly at the time as well, he was quite well known because of his book, and I think there was possibly a documentary that had accompanied it as well. So he was a well known face. So it could have been easy just to say, oh, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to
Yeah.
pretend I agree. So you have some integrity points, if not, you know, even if you lost a few for being slightly aggressive.
Yeah. I mean, I could. There's nothing that I said that I couldn't have said in a more polite and calm tone if I'd shown some more restraint.
Did you ever talk to him after that interview?
No, not in a completely separate. We spoke very briefly after we'd gone offline. And he was fine. He was fine. He didn't seem angry. But then some people, you know, some people like what I was doing with the other guests. Some people will hold back in the name of civility, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was cursing me under his breath. Because like I said, it was uncalled for. It was uncalled for. That was one of my that was my best and worst episode, because I still feel that there, like I said, there were some things that there's things that I said that I thought were really on point that nobody else was saying, and then but you know. I think that's true of any debate. If I had some advice, don't go into a discussion like that angry. You have nothing to gain by going into a discussion angry.
Yeah. Well, to come back to some of those other guests which might have created that pressure cooker, I'm thinking one in particular who you had on twice in the course of your run, which is Mr. Nadir Ahmed. I'm not sure what memories you have of him coming onto the show. He was you had two long conversations with him. I think both they ran to sort of 3 to 4 hours. Oh, hi, Hassan Radwan the show.
Yeah, Hassan's here. It's good to see you again, mate. I hope you're doing well.
I mean, Hassan, I mean, I can send you a link if you want to join us, if Atheismo doesn't mind, or you just pop in.
I don't mind at all. No.
Hassan, let us know if you'd like the link to join. I'll be more than happy to send it to you. So yeah, just drop a message if you'd like it. Yeah, so just to get back to Nadir Ahmed, do you have many memories of him? Does the name even ring a bell, or perhaps do I need to give you some more?
Is he the Miracles in the Quran guy?
Yes, yes, he
Okay.
is.
Yeah.
Scientific miracles in the Quran. So
Okay.
he was.
So I had some rules of conduct for myself, and with Nadir, I broke one of my own rules in that it was the first and last time that I just laughed in a guest's face over something they said. I don't remember what it was. But he said something, and I did something like a spit take laugh, even though I wasn't drinking anything. I just said, and then immediately muted my mic. I don't remember what it was. Now, Nadir, when he came on the show, he seemed like a very nice young man, despite his beliefs. And then when he would get off the show, he would talk all this trash, and I was like, "Hey, bud, we were so cool with each other, whatever our differences," and that wasn't very, that was less than honorable. And he sometimes would say, "Well, none of you responded to my challenge, and none of us knew the hell what he was talking about, or what channel he had taken to contact us, or who I mean, I thought we were pretty easy to find. And he's a strange cat, this guy." Those were fun episodes because this poor guy, he just didn't he didn't know what he was about.
Well, funnily enough, he's actually coming onto this channel for a live stream next week. So we're going to probably rake over similar territory, because it is kind of a his speciality is this same topic. I think he's not really changed much in terms of what he's argued since he talked to you guys 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
I'm imagining a similar level of frustration. But in fairness to him, he's agreed in good kind of faith to come on and have a discussion, and he would be the first Muslim guest I have. So I'll show him some respect for that, and I'll try and keep it as polite as I can. But I just not having recently watched the very long episodes when he came onto your show, staying calm in that level, and I commend you for that, because
Yeah.
I found it very frustrating that he didn't tend to respond to the points really that you and Klingshaw and Stotts were making. I think particularly Stotts was losing his rag a bit.
Well, I mean, I couldn't get mad at Nadir because he was too funny, And goodbye to Hassan, if you're just coming in and out. It's good to see you again. I'm glad you seem.
Yeah, great to see you, Hassan. You're always
there was no. I mean, like, some of the stuff he was saying was just so easy. I couldn't stay mad at Nadir, because, like I said, he's you need people to come up with stuff like that. It's like, oh, there's no light at the bottom of the ocean, just like the Quran says. And it's like, well, but we know that there is. And he would just get completely caught flat-footed, be like, there is, and we'd be like, yeah, there is. It's like, I can't stay angry at someone like that. He's just too overmatched. I just feel bad. Yeah.
I suppose I've. Well, I know obviously you've been out of the game for a long time in terms of talking about a religion, whereas those of us who've maintained an interest have seen Nadir many more times kind of deliver similar performances. So I suppose they lose their novelty after a while. But I'm going to do my best to try and provide something fresh next week anyway. So I'll see how I do, but I'm sure I'll fail. Did you do you have any other kind of particular fond memories of maybe of people that came on that that you spoke to?
Well, I remember the worst I ever got owned on the show. There was a doctor, and I don't remember his name. I guess I'm kind of like a typical Westerner in that Middle Eastern names kind of run together in my mind. But there was one doctor, and it was the worst I ever got pwned on the show. And this ties into what we talked about initially, about how I felt that our format, looking back for a while, was too unprofessional and dissolute, and we would go on too long. And we were talking to this guy, he's this doctor of something, and at the end, he's like, "Hey, are we gonna wrap things up? We've been here for like 4 hours." And I was like, "Okay, sir, yes, you're right. We should." And it was, even though he was being, you know, relatively nice about it, the subtext was, "Don't you losers have anywhere else to be?" You know?
I don't particularly remember that myself. I can throw you a name or two. I think there was a Dr. Ibrahim something or other. I'm just trying to look at my notes. Let me see. There was, because you had a couple of Quranists on, I seem to remember. I think
Yeah.
yeah, there was Edip Yüksel. I think that was a Turkish gentleman, and there's another name that escapes me now. Sorry, I don't. Again, I'm doing this a lack of preparation as a host thing that you were talking
That's
about
fine.
earlier.
That's in keeping with the tradition that I set as the founder. Someone in the chat said, "I have a question for you. There's a saying: if you wrestle with pigs, you get dirty in mud. What is the best way that people arguing can get the least amount of dirt on us? Don't get angry. Don't get angry. Just understand that it's not." You know, not everything hinges on one debate. It's not likely that you're going to have a debate that's going to change the course of a civilization. Yeah, the best thing is try not, you know, like, okay, listen to like a debate that you're not involved in. Listen to the audio or read it, and just practice not getting upset about it or worked up. You know, it's really easy to get annoyed. It's a common debate tactic to try to fluster your opponent with various strategies, and just that's the best way is don't get too upset, and don't think that there's too much riding on any particular discussion. You know, it's don't worry about not conceding something minor out of stubbornness. But the thing is, you know, it's not likely that much is going to change because of what you said. And then of course you have to think about you know, the responsibility if it does. And this is one of the I don't know how to describe this memory, but one of the things that I'll never forget, even though I forget who it was, is one time it was after a show. Someone contacted me on the Skype account that we ran to get the guests on, you know, the waiting room, and they said, you know, hey, you know, it's nice to talk to you. I was a believer, and then I watched the original Magic Sandwich show, and after I'd seen you in particular talk to Hamza, it led me down a path where I ended up leaving the faith. And I said, oh, well, okay, that's interesting. And you know, so it's funny because we argue and we fight and we struggle with each other, and we wonder, no matter what you're debating or what side you're on, you know, there's these times where you just curse the stubbornness of your ideological opponents, and then you feel frustrated. You wonder, you know, how much ammunition do we have to throw before we even how much do we have to fire before we even change the mind of a single person, even if it's just a single person who's lurking. And it takes a lot. People are very stubborn. People feel that they already have things figured out, or are following the banner of people who have everything figured out. So to change the mind of even one person is difficult. Don't hold your breath. But when you do, as I found, there's this sense of responsibility and dread, because this person was, you know, they were talking to me, and I felt like this crushing weight of responsibility, because I thought, well, wait, if they've made such a significant life change because they saw me arguing with Hamza, you know, a lot can happen due to a butterfly effect like that. And I felt like it's like going to your mailbox and getting a Father's Day card and you didn't know you had a kid. You know, it's like, well, what if this person, this is my paranoid Ally McBeal moment. I thought, well, what if this person looks to me for wisdom on some other front? What if they ask me for some sort of advice that I'm not qualified to give? And they didn't. They just said, okay, it was nice to meet you. Bye. But I thought, you know, I don't have I don't have things figured out. You know, you know, when I look back at my life, I'd make nearly every decision differently. So I can't claim to be particularly wise in that sort of, you know, and then what if I, you know, convince someone to leave the religion, and they do, and I think that I don't think that there's a true religion. I think that they're all, you know, guilty until proven innocent. You know, the burden. None of them have met their burden of proof for the claims. I don't think that. I think true religion is a contradiction of terms. But let's say that I say something, or any of us says something, and someone else says, "Well, you know, I'm leaving my faith," and they get disowned by their family. You know? And it was a terrible feeling of dread that I had. And then I got to thinking, there's a whole class of people who look at this power and influence over other people, and they covet it. And they're called priests, they're called rabbis, they're called imams and gurus and all these. And I think, you know, you have to be a real sociopath to desire that level of power over someone else's mind, right? The responsibility that made my blood run cold. They want that, and they think it's their prerogative. Which, like I said, that to me, I guess, is the single moment that made religious debate seem more high stakes than ever, because it could go either way. You could change someone else's life forever for the better or worse, or you know, or with stark contrasting changes just by some shit that you said, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting though on that point, because as you say, it can go either way. Either you can contribute to somebody leaving the religion, and therefore there's that sense of responsibility, or the other is that you can spend all this time talking and feel that it's not had much of an impact. And on the last episode that you hosted, you definitely had, when you were talking about the show coming to an end, you had kind of a downcast tone, being more in that second camp where you were almost questioning, you know, had the show had any impact at all, which I thought I was kind of surprised, because I thought, I don't know what the original audience size were back then when you were first doing it. I don't know whether you had dozens or hundreds of people watching, or even thousands, but I felt, even if it was a small audience, I thought you were talking about things which it just wasn't happening that much at that time. I mean, it's quite common now. I mean, there's huge numbers of channels which you do counter Islam, or, you know, ex-Muslim channels and stuff like that. So I mean, it's quite common now. But at the time, I thought it was kind of groundbreaking. So there was that disheartened sense that you had at the end of it. I thought I was a little surprised. I mean, do you sort of remember that feeling?
Well, I mean, it was very deliberate. When they said, "Well, we want to start a show about Islam," I said, "Okay, well, I want, you know, I want to focus on various subtopics, because at the time, everybody's, you know, this is war on terror. This is the era of the war on terror. There were really only 2 debates that ever happened, and none of them went anywhere. They went in these tight little circles. The first debate was, how much does the religion inform militant tendencies, including acts of terrorism in the Muslim world, and you know, between and stuff like that. The other was, how much does it inform social conservatism, particularly the treatment of women and the standing of women in a society where the law is applied, right? Those were the 2 discussions that eclipsed all others, and they never went anywhere, because it was just the same arguments. You know, it was just the same arguments over and over. So I wanted a show that treated it like if you're familiar with the American show Jeopardy.
Yeah.
You know, you have the subcategories, and then you have the different questions within the subcategories, and we would try to make it truly informative. And we'd say, well, you know, let's look at the difference between let's look at, okay, what's the history of Islam in North Africa specifically? What's the history of the split between the sects? What can we, as outsiders, and we would always, we weren't all knowing, but we had some very knowledgeable people on, and we were diligent researchers. We had Klingshore in particular really rolled up his sleeves and was very, very diligent. I don't know what sparked his interest in it initially, but he was very, very
wasn't he studying Islam at university? I thought, wasn't he, at the time?
That wouldn't surprise me.
I'm pretty sure that was the case. And I remember there was a couple of times when you and he had some spirited but quite heated kind of arguments. actually, one that sticks in my mind was it wasn't particularly to do with Islam. It was something to do with something in antiquity about, and you were arguing on the point of whether the religion had caused some kind of massacre or something
It
like
was
that.
whether the emergence of Christianity displacing paganism in the Byzantine Empire led to a downtrend of their secular learning traditions.
Yeah, and I remember it was the one time that you kind of pulled rank as host and actually like cut him off because I think he had called in, and you were like, basically, no, I'm right, fuck off. And
Well, I mean, I
yeah,
was.
well, it made me laugh. It made me laugh because it was the one time when you kind of abuse your power, but it was all sort of good because it was a very funny exchange. But yeah, I know. Yeah, he was certainly studying, and then he kind of he went off. Well, I mean, he took over for a year and a half after you had left, and then he went his separate ways, and Stops carried on with other co-hosts. But uh, I was just going to ask though, because after the run, you were you did come back to the Gin Tonic Show as a guest a couple of times when Stops and Klingshaw was doing it. Yeah, there was 2 episodes, I think, about 18 months later. But with the exception of those 2, I don't think you did you completely leave religion behind. You never did any
Yeah,
kind of.
I left any kind of skeptical debate completely and just went to do much more lighthearted stuff on a different account.
Yeah, you're
You know,
doing a gaming channel, I think, weren't you?
yeah. I remember when I started that, it was with another user from Skeptic YouTube called Sarahan06. And someone said, "Boy, does everybody and their brother need a does everybody need their own gaming channel? Seems like everybody is making a gaming channel in addition to their own regular channel." And Sarahan said, "I will not be satisfied until every starving African child has his own YouTube gaming channel."
Yeah, well, I think we're halfway there at this point, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, well, I mean, I think I've got pretty much to the end of the kind of planned questions I had for you. I don't know if anybody in the chat has got anything they'd like to ask Atheismo or.
Someone asked, would you guys like to speak to Dr. Abdul Patel to convert to Islam? I don't. I came on because Drastic asked. I'm not making any kind of a return to skeptical debate. I think it's an important debate. I think, but it doesn't have to involve me. If I've gotten the ball rolling on something larger than myself, great. But yeah, it's not something I have any interest in returning to. I remember when we actually stopped the original run of the show when Blog TV itself shut down, and I just took that as a sign, that okay, we've been doing it long enough that our horse or camel has been shot out from underneath us. That's as good a time as any to stop. But I mean, if people, like I said, given the impact that religion has on people's lives, given, like I said before, given the fact that you have worldwide people in robes and suits who think that they have every right to tell other people how to think and feel that taking someone's brain out of their head and putting it in their pocket is acceptable. It's an important debate, but it's not one that will involve me. I've sort of done my tours, and it could never really be as interesting as it used to be. And especially, like I said, there's not much of a dividend to like when I first got involved in the discussion. You had not just with Islam specifically, but with religion as a whole. You find skeptic YouTube and online skeptic communities, and at first you come into the people arguing against young Earth creationists, and there's one guy who really knows biology. There's another guy who really knows astronomy. People. There's these, the top most famous debunking channels on YouTube, and I felt like, well, I couldn't equal their knowledge in these subjects, but there was nobody on the roster of major YouTube personalities who specialized in language and linguistics and paleolinguistics who could do, and I thought, wow, it's like I'm the right person at the right moment in the right place, but nobody's really interested in that kind of obscure stuff. There's a handful of people who find it genuinely interesting. quibbling about what. Okay, so for example, there's different versions of the Quran, and some of the most recent English translations have been changed to accommodate a specific claim made by young Earth or Muslim creationists who say, well, the Quran accurately depicts the events that are now being revealed by science, right? So it's whether or not the universe is continuing to expand, right? And
I was gonna raise this because this is one of the things on the show that sticks out most in my mind. I think I even did it as part of a little clip show where you went through all the translation or at least half a dozen of the online translations, and they were all translated as and the universe is made expansive. But then there was this one modern one which had changed it to and the universe is expanding to fit with the inflationary cosmological model, and I think it's grown since then. I mean, that was 10 years ago. Now you will find a lot more translations where they've been conveniently tweaked to put them in line with but that was one of the most, it was things like that on the original Jinn and Tonic show that drew me in, because this was the kind of thing that I didn't see other people talking about. And it was really needed because a lot of people were taken in by this kind of bullshit, this rewriting of the translations, and they would I think they would get away with it without shows like the Jinn and Tonic show, where it was exposed that no, you've got 1,000 years of translations here all saying one thing. You've got something that was done 5 minutes ago has rewritten it, and we're all expected to accept this new one because it somehow validates the Quran as scientific somehow.
It's such a specific strategy with such a specific counter. And this is the thing. This is, I mean, despite what I said earlier about there being diminished returns, about being like going far afield in terms of reading all of those collected sayings and histories and commentaries, a lot of people charge into battle, so to speak, utterly ignorant. If everyone remembers what those horrible last seasons of Game of Thrones, there's this one scene where they have the horsemen from the Eastern Continent, the Dothraki, and they're like, okay, we want you to go charge out into utter darkness and see what you find, and then they get massacred. That was what a lot of the early engagements between skeptical YouTube and apologist YouTube, Muslim apologist YouTube, is people would charge out with no information and just not do their research and get caught flat-footed on the specifics, which in the eyes of believers who might be on the fence, they see that and they see the confidence with which the apologists stridently say, no, that's the error. You don't understand Quranic Arabic and so forth. If you have someone who just doesn't know any of the specifics and has a dismissive attitude towards a foreign faith, then they're going to be caught flat-footed on these technical issues, which to an observer who's not technically proficient, the relative confidence of the proponent and detractor, the combatants, is their metric for who's winning. And for someone, when you come in and say, well, no, when it says expanded, it's expanded. It is the classical Arabic, past participle, and you show all of, that you show that there's a clear pattern, and they'll still not admit that they're out of the fight at that point. The apologists, they'll say, well, no, you understand is Quranic Arabic is miraculous, and even when it's wrong, it's right. And it could mean anything. Any tense can be any tense. Any voice can be any voice. Any mood can be any mood. But of course, that's not the case, and you can bury them in examples of. But like I said, it's obscure. Even if you're right, even if you're absolutely right, the average person doesn't remember what a past participle was from grade school. So you're not, you don't, never, that's another thing is when you're arguing, never assume, I guess, never assume that you've got a silver bullet. Never assume that your next blow is the killing blow, because it can always be turned aside just through tricks of debate, tricks of personality, but yeah, it was a very specific set of skills at a very specific time, where you had people in particular arguing, high, like Highlanders fighting the English regular, the British regulars. You come down, you ambush, and then you run back into the highlands to escape. That's the way they would come out. They would make their arguments, and if they got any kind of retaliation, they would flee to culturally specific defenses, linguistically specific defenses. And there were so few who were able to pursue them into their own territory, so to speak, ideologically.
Right, I remember another example that really sticks out in my mind was when you discussed the meaning of jihad, whether it's the internal spiritual struggle or the external acts of aggression. And you did a similar job on that in terms of, as far as I remember, it was, although there are occasions when you can talk about it being an internal kind of spiritual struggle, most of the linguistics of the Quran is putting it in the context of or in the hadith, is putting it in the context of more of an aggressive kind of use of the word.
Well, they have a little bit like Japanese and some other languages. They have specific transitive and intransitive versions of the same words. So it's like I said, the average person, even the average believer, doesn't know this, and the average believer gets successfully intimidated out of looking into Quranic Arabic specifically, because even though you might have, well, first of all, not every Muslim speaks Arabic. Obviously, there's the minority worldwide speak Arabic of any stripe. If you look at the overall diaspora, you look at Muslims living obviously in Europe, but like in South Asia, for example, and many parts of Africa. There's a lot of Muslims that don't speak Arabic at all. But even those that do often get successfully barred from using their own critical thinking when looking at Quranic Arabic, which is very different. But the thing about the term jihad is like nearly every other word except for little particles and things and prepositions in Arabic. They come from these consonantal roots, and there's often no room for misunderstanding in terms of what the core meaning of that root is. And then, of course, and this is something really interesting if you're a language nerd, about how Afro-Asiatic languages work is, it's like, imagine an accordion player, how they stretch and bend the two ends of they stretch the middle and bend the ends of the instrument and then tap the keys. That's kind of how these consonantal roots work. And it's really, like I said, if you're into that as an academic subject, it's fascinating to find you're the first Afro-Asiatic or specifically first Semitic language you study is particularly interesting, because while, for example, Indo-Aryan European languages certainly have roots, you can look at the root of any English word and it can say, okay, here's where it comes through either its French or Germanic parentages, lineages. But there's a lot more malleability because consonants and vowels shift alike over time. In a Semitic language, the patterns by which you make the different parts of speech, like you take a core consonantal root and you want to make a verb out of it, you want to make a noun, you want to make a past participle out of it, you want to make an adjective. It's very regular. So the thing is, they kept saying that, okay, well, Quranic Arabic is so mysterious, nobody could ever really understand it except us right now because we say so. Somehow people who don't fail on basic academics can solve this Gordian knot, this Rubik's cube. But the fact is it follows the same logical patterns that any other language does. The issue is that the phrasing has changed over. First of all, the issue is if you're talking, let's say, with a lot of Western European and North American English-speaking skeptics, they can't even read the script. They're up the creek without a paddle if the debate goes that direction. But even if you had, for example, someone who spoke, as their native language, they spoke Arabic, they listen to, they watch Egyptian soap operas on TV and listen to the radio. They know modern standard Arabic as well as you could ever like, but they ask their imam or some sheikh, some guru or whatever. They ask them a question about, well, does this really mean that? They're still very vulnerable to being deceived. Because Quranic Arabic, while, like I said, the meaning of the roots, those are very concrete, and it takes a long time for them to change in meaning because they're of the way they're structured. But the turns of phrase have changed dramatically. So for one of the examples I often give is if you go to a high school production of Romeo and Juliet, they'll say, well, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Now, you can hear from the intonation they put on it whether or not they understand what they're saying, because it's archaic English, and she's saying, why did you have to be Romeo? Why did you have to be born to the family of my enemy? But a lot of people, a lot of students, they think that, well, it's wherefore starts with where, so it must just mean where. It's like, well, where are you? And you can hear it in their voice. You can hear it in their voice when they say it, and that's kind of an idea of the difference. Except it's in every sentence in Quranic Arabic. Is the turn of phrase is so archaic that it's like Shakespeare multiplied by the dialogue in Deadwood. It's just you could get them to sit down there and they would understand every single word and not understand the sentence. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was a couple of questions in the chat. Nick says, who would you say was the best guest that you had a discussion with on the show? I'm not sure if you might have answered that already. You said Tom Holland was the best and the worst, but I don't know if you remember any others.
As an episode, I think he was a nice guy. Who was the best guest? I mean, they a lot of them were pretty awful. I mean, it's like I was tempted to say and Culture Ginny is right. Swedish has I think Norwegian too also has varfor or something like that, where it's like literally where and for together make why. There's but definitely Swedish, and I think Norwegian does as well. So it dates if you look at the movement of human beings and Celtic peoples and Nordic peoples, it makes perfect sense why English once upon a time used a similar expression. Because the same barbarians crossed the same sea from those places. Well, I was tempted to give a smart aleck answer and say, "Oh, the best guest was me when I came back after I was no longer the host." But I don't know. Sometimes the worst guests made the best episodes.
I'll bring up one, and whether you remember this guy or not. There was a Muslim guy, English, called Mo Ansar.
Okay. I think he was probably the worst. He was probably
he ended up being exposed years later as basically a fraud for most of the claims he made about himself, and a bit of a fantasist, really. And he was, he was garbage as far as I was concerned.
He was very civil and utterly disingenuous.
Civil in that really fake way that actually makes you more frustrated at them. You'd prefer if they were more hostile but honest, because
but I mean, at the same time, I think that he was perhaps the most representative example of the landscape of that debate at the time. Because you'd ask Muhammad Ansar, it's like, so what do you think about such and such a rule? And like I said, if you've seen the show, we don't we're not there just to ambush people, and we're not waiting behind a corner with sticks. I try to, if there was any dog piling, I would pull people off. I wanted people to feel safe and respected as they talked about their beliefs and their convictions and laid out their arguments. But we'd say, well, what do you think about the rule? What do you think about this rule or that rule? And he's like, oh, that rule doesn't exist, or you can do whatever you want. And he acted as though none of the books of law existed, right? And it's not in the sense that Quranists, Quraniyun, say, well, only the Quran matters in the discussion debate, but he just wholesale pretended like Islam never happened.
Yeah,
it was frustrating.
It was almost a you could just pick anything you like and say that it's Islamic and discard anything you like as well. And I particularly remember it were things like the age of allowable marriage. You're talking about Aisha, etc. And he danced around that like a professional. It was incredibly irritating, and not just dance around it, just played whataboutism, just kept saying, oh, well, sex offenders are predominantly from non-Muslim populations and stuff like this, and just every opportunity to avoid giving a straight answer.
This goes back to someone a question somebody asked in the chat about wrestling with pigs and things like that. It was a bit annoying, but I didn't. Muhammad Ansar didn't make me angry. And this is this is the one thing that I would advise if anyone is worried about that sort of thing, is like, well, how do we avoid getting muddy? I at no point in that discussion did I ever get anxious, because everybody can see what he's doing, So I just let him spin his yarns, and it's a little annoying, but it didn't impact my heart rate didn't change, because I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to let him do what he's doing, and people can see it, It's a lot more convincing. It's as convincing, if not more convincing, than if I say, "Hey, wait," and I start pulling my hair out. People can see it, and they need to see it.
You did a kind of debrief after he'd left as well, addressing some of the points that he'd made or failed to make, and not in an unfair way. It wasn't like you were trash talking him or anything. It was just, let's do a careful analysis of what he's actually said, and we can realize he's bullshitting us. I suppose that's a better way of dealing with it, rather than losing your shit with someone and screaming at them. I think there was one more question, again from Nick. He said, when you started the show, what did you see as the goal, or what was the future for the show to be? Did you expect it to go on for 11 years?
I never expected to go on 11 years. I don't know how long I expected to go on. I like I said, I wanted to just break new ground. The discussion the discussion about Islam became stale as soon as it began, because of the reasons I said. There were only ever two debates, and the arguments were always the same. And you had often both sides being relatively poorly equipped, but certainly the apologist side being overwhelmingly better situated, having the more advantageous terrain when arguing with most English-speaking never Muslims. But the idea was just to break new ground and to learn more about the specifics, whereas so many people, even well-meaning people, were talking out of their rear ends. They were surrounded by misconceptions, by critics of Islam, by outright kind of knuckle-dragging anti-Muslim conspiracy theorists. You had, of course, the apologists spreading nonstop misinformation. And then, of course, you just had a general cloud of fog of people who were just utterly uninformed on the specifics, and nobody was breaking new ground. Nobody was actually rolling up their sleeves and digging. And then we had people. I did my best to stay informed. We had, of course, former Muslims who were very knowledgeable. Rationalizer and Klingshore really were determined researchers. We had an excellent regular panelist who went by the name of Frank. He was a Saudi former believer. I remember that guy. Very, very excellent segments that were very well researched. And we would correct even the smallest thing. For example, in the Middle Ages, they had some speakeasies, despite the prohibitions on alcohol in many places. The ruling class during the Umayyad dynasty did whatever they wanted, but ordinary believers, if they drank alcohol, they had to do it in some dive in some back alley. And one time Frank said, "Oh, I made a mistake. We need to correct this on the show. I said that it was in this district of the city, but it was really in this other district of the same city." And we would make a point of going on and correcting it. Accuracy and information was our goal. We weren't infallible, but we wanted to have a show where we showed all our sources. We didn't make any kind of declarations by fiat. We did not seek to become an authority saying, okay, well, this is the way it is because we say so. Everything had to be backed up by specific references. And I felt that we would just kind of advance the quality of the discussion, which was just so abysmal because, like I said, you had people who, and we weren't, I personally wasn't focused on any kind of debunking, because if you remember what the landscape was of skeptic YouTube, it was all about who can make the best dunk on Venom Fang X or some other apologist, and I wanted to be at the same time the opposite of that in many ways, and the point was not to win. The point wasn't to win. The point was to learn. Because if nothing else, so many people, so many people's minds are made up. If someone believes that they have to believe a certain thing or they'll be tortured for eternity and all of their social influences, I mean, their mind is often made up. They're not going to change many people's minds. People who would look askance at a faith that has these bizarre supernatural claims, and then also has the coefficient, in terms of the West, of being foreign, which is always going to make it seem more over the top. Well, they're convinced. There's not, like, if you look at things like the Mirage, where the Prophet of Islam allegedly got on the back of this chimerical creature and they described all kinds of fantastic features that it has. They, depending on how you translate it, it either had the face of a woman or an animalistic face that was so beautiful it could have been a woman's face. And then he flies up into outer space and talks to a bunch
speed
of
light, I think, isn't it, as well? At the speed of light.
Yeah, the Borak. Yeah, that's right. The Borak. He breaks the sound barrier and flies up. He flies up in outer space and he talks to God, even though the Quran says nobody's ever met God or ever will meet God face to face, whatever. So he meets all of these different saints from Judeo-Christian tradition, and and then he gets some stuff, gets debriefed on some things, and then flies back down. I think first to he first does a drive-by on Jerusalem and then flies between Mecca and Medina really quickly, and then he lands. And there's not many people who aren't raised to believe that, who are prepared to believe that, right? It's like even if you believe in occult things, if you believe in spiritualism and it still seems silly. Even in a world where there's magic, it seems silly, right? It seems, and this is admittedly unfair and somewhat illogical. Something that's foreign that's silly is going to seem sillier than something that is domestic and silly. The idea of Noah's Ark, an old man summoning animals from all over the world, putting them in a single ship and floating it. Well, that's silly, but it's going to seem less silly than the Mirage because we grew up hearing it, right? Yeah, so you got to be self-aware about that. It's going to seem sillier. And I remember one time there was some Christian apologist on YouTube. I want to say that it was Nephilim free, but I don't know. I think it was either him or part of a group that he was with. And they were talking about how I actually forget who started it, but between there's a talking donkey in some of the stories that are considered official stories, part of the core religious writings. That's a point where you can't say that, you're not allowed to say that they're wrong, right? You're not allowed to say they're wrong. that had a talking donkey, and it was Muhammad's companion. And this could have been like when you think of this guy riding around on this magical creature with a sword, with a magical sword called the Spine Breaker, and a companion who's a talking donkey, among other sidekicks. It's like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon from decades ago. It's just such a weird panoply image. But I don't know who started it, but I'll say maybe a Christian poked fun at that, and someone said, well, but there's in the book of Numbers, there's a guy named Balaam who has a talking donkey. And then that started a back and forth about whose talking donkey was silly and stupid, and whose talking donkey was proof of the grace and majesty of their version of the God of Abraham. So, like I said, not many people are going to be convinced of that kind of thing who weren't indoctrinated from a young age. There's indoctrination is a powerful thing. If some people, I guess, were fortunate enough to be raised in households that were already secular, but I mean, it's a powerful force when every single adult in your life, when you're a kid, believes in these things, and believes that your own individual morality is contingent on believing those things. It's tough. So the point I was saying, as far as your general attitude and approach to debate, and my own approach to the show is, I wasn't worried about a body count of people going back and forth between believing and not believing in Islam or religiosity, spiritualism. I was just focused on making it, more informative, and saying, okay, well, what's the history of the relation of Islam or this is concerned, or let's just zoom in on this particular portion of their literature and so forth. Someone in the chat said the only miracle about the Quran is that anyone ever takes it seriously. Oh my goodness, I could go another hour about my issues with the Quran just as a book. I saw some blurb about it years and years ago, and some person, I don't remember who the heck it was, they said, well, as a piece of literature, the Quran is entirely without merit. And I thought, that's it, I'm done, that sums it up. It's really everything about the way it's put together is utterly confusing and misleading. It really shows that it came from by structure. If someone if someone grew up in a Christian household or around Christianity and is somewhat passingly familiar, the Quran, in terms of its format, is much closer to a hymnal book that you'd find in the pew of a church than it is to the Bible, right?
Yeah.
That's what I think a lot of people don't understand when they form an opinion about the religious literature itself, is they think the Quran is their Bible. Only in terms of importance, in terms of structure, it couldn't be more different. It's much more like, if you pick up a hymnal from a church, you'll find a lot, praise God, his is the mercy, just praising the deity of it, praising key figures, sometimes condemn. I mean, in the Quran itself, the constant drumbeat of condemnation against doubters and disbelievers and enemies of the faith, enemies of God. That's something that I think would contrast it with a Christian hymnal. I haven't read a hymnal book in the longest time. I don't know how from memory how frequently. It doesn't seem like they dwell on the enemies of the Christian version of the God of Abraham or Jesus specifically, but it doesn't seem like they did. But like I said, it's just these verses that in their original language are supposed to be very, very beautiful, and they keep a specific meter and rhyme in some places, in others they don't. And that in and of itself is supposed to be part of the miracle. Everything is part of the miracle. Anything else, it's part of the miracle. That's the explanation.
It's funny actually, Atheismo, because I was going to say the one episode that was missing from the original run, which I can't find, is the show you did on the Sura Like It challenge, which is infamously ridiculous. And it's a real shame because I have no memory of the original, and I would have love to have seen how you guys had deconstructed it, because it is one of the most ridiculous claims in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I imagine obviously you had argued this point in the past. I mean, do you have any memory of doing a show on the Sura Like It challenge?
Yeah. We didn't get any believers who took us up on that. Although we did have Godless Saudi say, Godless Saudi saying that it's harder than you think if you're dabbling in Arabic to make one, because it does have a style which people are like. There's not much else literature like it. Even the different forms of poetry that emerged later had a different meter and format and style. But people would have been, the only people who knew about Quranic Arabic were the people very local to the religion, and they would have been loath to parody it or copy it too closely. So it does have this indelible style. Like if I if I give someone a bunch of jokes and I say, okay, some of these are Andrew Dice Clay jokes and some of these are Rodney Dangerfield jokes. Well, someone familiar with either of those two comedians can immediately sort those into two perfect piles.
Yeah.
Of course, the underlying claim is ridiculous and unfalsifiable, which to them, to the apologist, means nothing, but to someone who is more formal in their approach to these things, it means everything. If I say, well, my wife can make a lasagna that's the best lasagna ever, you cannot make a lasagna better than her, ergo she is an angel. That's an unfalsifiable claim. And even if you get Gordon Ramsay to make a lasagna that is identical, he uses his skills not to make the best lasagna possible, but to make a lasagna that is identical, even if it's a little bit burned. He just says, okay, well, using my expertise, I can make a lasagna that is exactly like your wife's lasagna. It doesn't matter. It's not a reasonable argument to begin with. And there's plenty of other reasons to believe the Quran is not divine. And one of those key things is just the mood of the voice that it takes. So what I think will send a lot of people, will confuse a lot of new readers, is the mood swings that the Quran seems to have towards attitude, general things, but in particular their attitude towards their opponents, the non-believers. And if you read it cover to cover, you're not reading it even close to the chronological order in which it was written, and that's a source of a lot of the confusion. So, for example, in when you're studying Christian scriptures, there's this contrast between the sort of vindictive Old Testament God and the more forgiveness-focused messages of Christ, who's supposed to be a living incarnation of it. And that's there's all kinds of ways that people, Christians and Christian apologists rationalize that, but it's a clear contrast anyone can see, and anyone who reads it even in a cursory fashion can clearly make this distinction and at least understand why people say that. In the Quran, it really seems like you're listening to someone who is bipolar. And one moment is saying, well, we should approach people who don't believe with understanding and forgiveness and patience, and then the next minute he's just talking about them in the most horrific ways, in an utterly hostile, dehumanizing tone. And then he goes back, but it's because you're looking at like a celery stalk that's been diced up and then shoved into a bowl. It's not in the original. It's not in the original order at all. And if you find a concordance of the Quran or some other Quran with documentation that lays out the proper reading order, so you're reading the verses and individual portions, and it gets even worse. It gets even more convoluted, because a surah would be partially revealed according to the founder of the faith, and then he'd go back and add addendums to it. So even then, you'll find a verse that he's in a good mood, and then it'll be the last few chapters of the surah, well, he's angry again. Yeah, so it's even because it's at a different point in time. And if you read them in the order that they were actually revealed, as best as anyone can determine, as best as the top scholars and Orientalists can agree, it clearly follows Muhammad's mood as his fortunes rise and fall. When he is just getting started out, he's very hopeful. As he runs into Smile says the authorship of the Quran feels like it involved a lot of monkeys and typewriters. It can. It's quite disjointed. But at least it makes a little bit more sense. Like I said, if you read it chronologically, because you see Muhammad's moods, and it's supposed to be the mood of the God and that is revealing into this message to him. But when he gets started, he's very optimistic and hopeful. Then he's a bit frustrated, but still very. He's still when he's still in Mecca originally, he's playing nice because he's badly outnumbered. Then he gets kicked out and goes to Medina. Now he's bitter. He's bitter and angry. Then his forces develop. Now he's a little bit more hopeful, but the language is decidedly militant. Then he returns victoriously to Mecca. Now he is very high-handed and arrogant and derogatory. And you think, well, if this is supposed to be a God speaking, he should be experiencing everything at the same time. He shouldn't have these kinds of moods. I mean, it's in nearly every scripture that has gods, it has beings that the modern believers say, oh, they're timeless and all-knowing and so forth. But it certainly portrays them as personalities that are routinely surprised and live in the moment, and aren't, if they, I'm saying, like if you sit down to watch a movie that you've already seen, you're already angry about stuff that happened at the end, you already don't, a character comes on, you already like or don't like them based on whether they're redeemed, because you can sit down, and to the best a human mind could ever do such a thing, you can experience every moment of that movie at the same time, and you already know that Kevin Spacey is Kaiser Sose, but
spoilers.
The gods of all of the collected world religions sit forward and spill their popcorn and say, "Wait, what?" And yet they're supposed to be timeless beings. So, like I said, if nothing else, you look at the mood swings throughout the Quran. It's clearly a human being saying what's on their mind. But there were times where, like, it reads, regardless of whether you read it chronologically or not, it reads like someone alone in a house or some bivouac in the field, just pacing back and forth with a handheld recorder, saying, the unbelievers will get theirs. Theirs will be the fire, over and over again. Just angry, obsessive rambling. And it's bizarre to think that people can be told that, okay, well, this is from a higher being who has a higher state of mind than any of us, and I don't see it. I don't see it at all.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, it's, as you say, if you're not born into the tradition, it's incredibly difficult to see how anyone is going to be persuaded by it. And I think I think the only chance that you have in terms of people who genuinely convert are those who have probably already got a Christian background, and so therefore have enough familiarity with some of the stories within the Quran that it just feels close enough that if I kind of maybe close my ears a little bit to the more bizarre kind of elements to it, you can kind of go along with it until you've, I don't know, re-indoctrinated yourself into a new faith. Because I mean, it's the bizarre nature of some of the stuff in the Quran, talking ants and various other things. Yeah, I really struggle to believe that someone could honestly not be brought up with that and say, yep, this makes the most logical sense of how the universe runs, this tone. I just find it
Someone in the chat said, he said, even Aisha remarked at how often Allah seemed to hasten to fill Muhammad's personal desires. Yeah, Aisha was working from the inside. She was on our side. she because she was such an important person to Muhammad and factored so largely in his life, the things that she said also got recorded in the hadith, and she was practically a whistleblower on the whole thing. And the things concerning her said about, I mean, were all of the, like, if you're gonna go after, if you're gonna debate Islam and go after the jugular in the straightest sense, just get a copy of the hadith, like a digital version, and just search her name and the sunnah that are attributed to her, because she doesn't have a lot of nice things to say. She's along for the ride, and yeah, nearly all of the most damning things are pertinent to her or said from her. And like one of the running, like I said, one of the two arguments, the stale as soon as they're fresh arguments, was Islam and women, and you had such shameless lies about what the doctrine actually said about women and the role that they should play according to these divine influences in their society. But then you'd have in the Sunnah, there's one in Sahih Bukhari in particular that I think it makes it an open and shut case for any apologist trying to say that Islam is treats women in an equitable way if the law were literally applied to other societies, particularly to like a post feminist society. There's one. A woman comes to Aisha and talks about a dispute she's having with her husband, and Aisha rolls back her sleeve and says that her skin was so badly discolored you couldn't tell the difference between her skin and her robe was, I think, green. And she actually just exclaims aloud, it's like, there's no woman who has to put up, who struggles or suffers the way a believing woman does, which is pretty damning. Because it shows that of all the faiths and communities that she is aware, I mean, people speak in hyperbole even in ancient times, but I mean, that's a pretty damning statement to come from the favorite wife of the founder of the faith. So then they bring her in front of Muhammad, and he's supposed to play. Now he's going to be the judge, right, as he is with so many other things, and then they bring forward the husband who's been savagely beating her, and the kids. And one of the complaints that this woman has come up with, probably in an effort to get the marriage annulled or something, because she's being serially abused, she accuses him of being untrue, or accuses him of being cucked by her and someone else. And Muhammad's response, he looks at the kids and he looks at the husband. He says, "Oh, well, they resemble him the way a crow resembles a crow." Basically, well, your case is thrown out because your claim of father, some other man fathering his children is false. And he doesn't have a single word to say about her bruises. He doesn't give a shit. And that's one of several key hadiths. There's another one where there's a guy who even he says, well, this other guy, don't marry your daughter or sister, whoever, to this guy. His rod is never down from his shoulder, meaning he is chronically beating members of his household. And he says, wow, even for me, that guy's bad with women. He just beats the shit, but doesn't chastise him and doesn't give any indication that he'll chastise him. He doesn't give any indication that no matter, you can beat a member of your household, one of your wives or kids or goats, and to death's door, and at no point will he say, not even in his capacity as the prophet of the faith, but just as a person, it's like, whoa, hey, take it easy there. There's too much good thing when it comes to beating the shit out of people for not, for spilling your tea or whatever. That's an open and shut case. There's an open and shut case. There's everything you hear from the apologists on this is just pure bullshit. And what's sad, you can't even give them the anthropologist's excuse, because if we're looking at different societies, and late, antiquity and the Middle Ages, you can say, well, of course, women or slaves or serfs or people of other, this and that, of course they were treated this way. It was a more savage time, but you have people recorded at the time saying, this is bad even by our standard. This is bad. Even our ancient minds that live in these patriarchal power structures and other things, even for us, this is bad, right? And you still have apologists saying, no, Islam's the best thing that ever happened to women.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think this is why the the struggle to discuss this stuff continues, because unfortunately it is still promoted by some segment of Muslims, this justifying these pretty brutal things, and it can have knock-on consequences. Not to say that every Muslim out there is going to live by such a hardline mentality, but you've got God kind of giving it a seal of approval. It's I think it potentially can have some negative impact on the world. So I think this is why many of us still carry on with it. I've got to say, Atheismo, for somebody who hasn't done this in 9.5 years, you've got a pretty damn good memory for particular hadiths and Quranic passages. It's quite impressive. Are you sure you don't want to make a comeback?
No. I've forgotten 9/10 of what I ever knew about it. It's been so long, particularly just my ability to read the language. You can like people. Like I said, language is something that really intimidates people, but you can pick up the script relatively quickly. Although, because they don't write the vowels, if someone writes out a word you don't know, it's ironically, it's a little bit like English, in that if you see a diphthong that you haven't seen before, you have to guess at it, and it's Arabic's the same way. But I've forgotten most of what I knew. It's only because we're talking about it is it finally coming back to me. But I'd be underqualified to debate my former self about it. And no, I'm fully retired. I'm doing other much more lighthearted stuff.
Well, that's fair enough. Well, we've reached 2 hours. I can't believe it's been that long since we've been talking. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I would love to have you come back on and talk some more. Although you've just said you are completely retired.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It seems unlikely, but unless there's anything else that you want to go through, I think we've covered everything in pretty good detail. Is there anything you want to promote in terms of what you're doing now, or anything like that?
I have other little piddling projects that aren't really worth mentioning. If they ever take off, you'll hear about them. Right now, I'm working on a computer game. It'll be a PC game, and it's going to be like a poor man's Elder Scrolls. A lot of people are fed up with the way that company does things, so I'm trying to develop an indie alternative that's much more moddable. You don't need a night school degree to add mods to it, but of course it's working in 3D. Making 3D software is a lot of work, so it's taken me years to get to the point where it is, and it's still very unfinished. So yeah.
Are you still using your other YouTube channel where I reached out to you on? Are you?
YouTube's not such a great environment for smaller creators these days, unfortunately. Unless you're like connected to a larger community of people who shout you out and Daggerfall style. So someone in the chat said, "Is it Daggerfall style?" It's if you take the best parts of the relative modernity of Skyrim's an ancient game now. If you take the sort of player-friendly interface and graphical quality of like a modded Skyrim, and then you had the expanse and complexity of Daggerfall, basically the best of Daggerfall and the best of Skyrim, but then more moddable. I've got the system where you can take like any kind of mod, like every kind of mod is going to have its own little kit that comes with it. So you just like, it'll be much simpler because a lot of people, it's incredibly complex to put these things together. So you can just, whether you're making a character, a quest, a zone, a village or something like that, you put it together in a way that's in a kit that's much more automatic and much more idiot proof than the creation kits that Bethesda puts out. And then what you do is you take a screenshot of it, and it formats and spits out a file that's like a PNG file that looks like a Magic the Gathering card that has your screenshot and a description that you put, and in the PNG file is packed the data that is pertinent to it. So modding is just a matter of looking at, sorting through these cards, popping them in the requisite folders, then the game scans the folders and loads those things into the game, right? So if you wanted to, if you wanted to load in, can you two autograph my Jinn Tonic merch? Yeah, unfortunately not. I don't think it's possible. So I don't know if it'll take, if I can get it off the ground, I think it might be relatively popular, but
well, if it does, you can always come back on here if you want to
shamelessly promote it.
Yeah, it's least I can do to thank you. Yeah, well, unless there's anything else you want to say, Atheismo, or anybody else in the chat want to ask any last questions, I think we'll wrap it up. Yeah, from my point of view, it's been a real pleasure having you come on. I could literally talk another 2 hours with you, but unfortunately, I have real life matters to contend with at the moment. Thanks so much, Atheismo. If you ever do want to come on, you ever get the itch again, just send me a message and I'll have you on in an instant. And last words to you.
Oh yeah, well, just thanks for having me. I apologize for almost missing our time slot because I'd forgotten that the London time zone isn't exactly GMT during the summer. I thought for some reason I had in my mind that Brits didn't do daylight savings. I don't know where I got that idea, but we're on our daylight savings, and I thought you guys weren't on yours because you didn't have one. So I almost missed the show entirely just due to a simple misunderstanding. So
no, it happens. It happens. Yeah. It's fine. And well, it's been great having you, and yeah, good luck with your gaming and everything. And,
and good luck to you and to the guys in the Jinn Tonic Show. What I heard from them, I actually watched yesterday's the 11th anniversary issue, and they said that they were going to have a guest on that has 250,000 subscribers on YouTube. Hopefully, it is like breathes new life into the show. I wish them the best, even though I don't want it to ever have anything to do with me again. I'm fully retired. Yeah.
That's all right. Well, look, I might clip this little bit of the show just to play, on next week's show, just so you can, it can be your departing message to the Well, thanks so much, and I think I'll end it there. Thanks to everyone in the audience who was asking questions. It's been good fun. Hope everyone enjoyed it, and this was the first Drastic Measures live stream with special guest Almighty Atheismo. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everyone.